Okay, welcome everybody to this JCE panel. I wanted to start, unfortunately, with an apology for two of the editors who can't be with us today for technical and medical reasons, as Melinda Cooper and Michael Pryke had to pull out as of yesterday. So we've done some last minute improvisation, and I'm sure you're not going to notice the difference. Carol said in the keynote this morning, because some people were talking about a slightly melancholy year because it's the last press conference. Who wants to be building an institution? The JCE kind of wants to be building an institution. so we're very pleased that you've turned up in enough numbers to make the room feel too small. And also I see that there are people like Liz Moore and Ishmael Erturk, and I saw David Bryan earlier on, who are members of who've published with the journal, and Lynn as well, and probably other people. So it's really, really good to see you, and we hope that we can use this session to tell you a little bit about the history of the journal, how it's doing, and what we think the future directions are. And I wanted also to take the opportunity to announce that as of the start of 2015, the editors group expand with the joining of Bill Maurer as a new editor, and with Paul DeGay also joining us. Joe DeVille taking on expanded profile as online and open access editor. Tony taking on a role as chair of the editorial board, and we will be looking to appoint a new review editor as well. We are also looking to go to 6 issues a year from 4 issues a year, so it's onwards ever upwards. And to that, what we're going to do now is Joe is going to tell you a little bit about how the journal's doing, and he'll pass over to Tony. We'll all speak for about 5 to 10 minutes each, who will talk a little bit about how the journal started. I'm going to focus a little bit about how it grew, and Bill is going to talk about the future.
Very much, Liz. So yeah, I'm just going to give some just some basic information about the journal, where the journal is, and where it's going, before we get on to perhaps some more fun and interesting stuff from the other 3 editors here. So the journal, I guess the top line message of the journal is doing really well, but I guess we would say that, wouldn't we? But it is doing really well, I think, and I think we had a meeting yesterday with Antonio Francis, and they're very happy with us as a journal. I think we, as academics and editors, are also very happy both with how it's doing in terms of some of the kind of quantitative measures, but also in terms of the content that's appearing in the journal. So subscriptions, downloads, and citations are all increasing year by year. Our institutional subscriptions are on an upward trend, so 2011 to 2012 they went up by over 50%, and then last year they actually doubled, which is really great, and we expect that to increase as we go forward. This year, in the past 8 months or so, we've already had almost 12,000 full text downloads, and by the end of the year, by the time we get to the end of December, we expect the full quantity to be a marked increase on 2012. We're still quite a new journal, but it is accelerating rapidly. The top 10 most downloaded articles range from around 150 downloads to almost 2,000, which is what you get if you're Judith Butler and you write on performativity in the Journal of Cultural Economy. And we expect the formal ISI assessment of the impact factor to come shortly. They're a bit of a kind of opaque bunch, so we're not quite sure when that will come, but we expect it shortly. Over the past few years, and also going back to the very beginning of the journal, we published some really fantastic special issues, which I thought might be a good idea just to highlight here, because I think they give a nice perhaps overview of some of the concerns of the journal and some of the kind of authors some of the concerns some of the authors that are published in the journal. Of course, these special issues are complemented by open issues, which are issues featuring unsolicited submissions. So this year we have a really fantastic collection coming out featuring a lot of people that I actually know, edited by Alberto Jimenez, on prototyping, so looking at various forms of beta testing and preempting through devices in relation to various markets. We had the economization of uncertainty, edited by Turo Kimmo Leitonen and Ina van Hooijdonk, which looked at how uncertainty is standardized, homogenized, and made calculable. Featured articles by authors including Stephen Collier, Pat O'Malley, Luis Lobo-Guerrero. Last year had John Law and Evelyn Rupert's really fantastic social life of methods special issue, which focused on devices. Devices obviously have been an incredibly important conceptual resource within STS, within active network theory, and then increasingly within cultural economy. So a series of essays, including one by Turk and some others here, looking at devices, looking to perhaps expand and clarify what devices do and how we might think about devices, and perhaps looking somewhat critically at the concept as well. Some of the essays have done. Other articles in that collection include authors including Nort Chamaras, Penny Harvey from Kresge, Evan Rupert, Javier Lazon, Fabio Muniz, and a number of others. We have a number of special issues focused on the question of finance. Had the fictions of finance special issue, which I think is quite nice because it points to some of the more interdisciplinary work that the journal hosts. But this is a special issue featuring mainly scholars from the humanities, which looked at what the editor Peter Knight called the narratives, tropes and foundational metaphors and institutional contexts that have helped sustain particular forms of economic and financial knowledge in various texts, both contemporary and historical. And then we have the financial subject special issue, which is one of the best special issues in the journal. I only say that because I'm in it. But no, it's a really great issue. And that's looking at how various forms of subjectivity and financial subjects are created in various different empirical settings, ranging from the work of debt collection to the annuities market to other forms of credit encounter. Had Mary Poovy's special issue on financial panics and crises, which again, perhaps similar to some of the fictions of finance, themes of some of the fictions of finance issue, looked at how crisis as a trope has filtered through texts from a variety of different periods historically, and then try and connect that to how crisis was appearing and was becoming relevant and was resonant in the contemporary moment. And also in 2012 we had a special issue focused explicitly on the topic of data, edited by Louise Moore and Marieke de Rode, which quite presciently looked at the way in which data was becoming increasingly important in the governance of terror and in the war against terror. Okay. As we move into the future, we're already having an increasing number of open submissions, so we're now at around 50% open submissions, so these are unsolicited submissions, and we expect that proportion to increase. Liz has already mentioned the new editorial board members and the fact that we're moving to 6 issues from January 2015. The reviews and commentary section, which is what I'm partly responsible for editing at the moment, we expect that to increase in terms of the amount of work we publish in there. And we also hope that it keeps being a space that can host quite a little bit slightly more innovative and experimental work. We've reviewed a huge, quite wide range of texts within the field of cultural economy from some really great authors, and they have been some of these reviews have been sort of standard reviews. We've also had commentary pieces and almost kind of like obituary pieces and pieces that perhaps mirror the tone of publications like the London Review of Books. That's kind of what we're trying to move towards. Another kind of major development from next year is that we'll be expanding our online presence. We'll be launching a new companion website for the journal, which aims to allow us to host some more open material that perhaps doesn't fit within the journal, to host things like podcasts and videocasts, to feature certain issues and certain articles. I'll come on to that a bit more in a second. We'll also be increasing our social media presence by starting a Twitter stream and Facebook and all that kind of stuff. And some of you may also know the Charisma project, which Liz and I co-founded, which is a kind of a side kind of project of ours, which looks at consumer markets, but which is quite closely allied to the concerns of the Journal of Cultural Economy. We feature quite a lot of the work and issues of the Journal of Cultural Economy in Charisma, and also the Journal of Cultural Economy is a partner to that project. So we'll be building further links to that project via the new website and via the journal. This is a very quick sneak preview of this new companion site that we'll be launching with just some dummy content in. So the aim is to provide, a slightly more kind of playful open space, place we can host some visual materials, which at the moment the JCE main site isn't really designed to do. It's quite a long, thin website. Okay, so that's, I think, pretty much it from me. We always welcome submissions, both individual articles and special issue proposals. So if you are thinking of submitting, we would very much encourage you to do so. Please stay in touch with us. One of the best ways to do that is to sign up to the table of contents alerts on the Tony Francis Journal of Cultural Economy homepage. If you also want to stay up to date about the new companion site, then what I would recommend that you do is go to the Charisma page, which is charisma-network.net, and sign up to the mailing list, because we'll be training and discussing that as it comes up to launch. And similarly, you can also follow Charisma on Twitter and on Facebook for now, and then in due course, as I say, there will be a Journal of Cultural Economy and social media presence. I think that's it for me.
Very good. So can we get my PowerPoint up? While Joe's doing that, my role is to be a kind of like archivist, I think, for the journal, and I feel a bit like a bit player in Dickens's Christmas Carol. I've been cast in the role of the spirit of JCE past. So I'm going to cover something of the prehistory of the journal, to talk about the thinking that went into it before the first group of editors was actually assembled together, and that was myself, Liz and Mike. But the thinking was originally shaped not by that group of individuals, but by the executive of Kresk. So that's the kind of thinking I'm going to be going back to. And it's been interesting to look over some of the earlier documentation for our conception of the journal, to realise what an iterative process the development of a journal is. In as much as the trajectory of the journal doesn't kind of entirely match up to what was envisaged in the original set of proposals that we formulated and eventually put to Radcliffe. And that's a good thing, because it testifies to the ways in which the trajectories of the journal have been shaped by its engagement with real-world developments, the ways in which real-world developments have engaged with it, the ways in which it's connected with new constituencies as its work has developed. Nonetheless, I think there's been a clear guiding thread throughout the various stages of its history, and that has been not to develop cultural economy as a kind of like a discrete field of empirical inquiry, so that it's, the journal of cultural economy as in the knowledge economy or the creative economy or that kind of territory, although it includes those concepts. And not to establish cultural economy as a particular discipline, seeking conventional disciplinary credentials, but to establish it as an area that can strategically probe and develop a number of kind of like interdisciplinary connections in and around the relations between culture, social and the economy, without trying to kind of put forward any privileged or definite or orthodox ways in which those relationships need to be viewed or engaged with. The genesis of the journal goes back to 2003, when Kresk was proposed to the ESRC. There was a statement in it that we, at some point in time, we later came to regret, was quite a rash statement, that we would develop an interlinked book series and journal that would, deliver and involve a wide range of constituencies in the work of Kresk. This became a contractual commitment that we entered into with the ESRC in 2004. The contractual commitment was that we would develop a journal and a book series under the joint title of Culture, Economy and Society. In fact, what we ended up doing was to develop a book series called Culture, Economy and the Social, that's edited by myself, Penny Harvey and Kevin Hetherington, and a journal called Journal of Cultural Economy. And the reason for the change of title was a number of members of the journal Economy and Society were quite close to Kresk at the time, and thought, and I think they were right, that using the terms culture, economy and society, the economy and society pairing might create a degree of confusion in the marketplace. And nothing to do with the fact that Nick Wills was chair of our advisory board. No connection whatsoever. So, that was the main reason for dropping the title. as I said, the book series became Cultural Economy and the Social. The journal became the Journal of Cultural Economy. These were conceived as a linked endeavour, and they are in various ways kind of like marketed together by Routledge. If you buy, as you should, a book from the series, you'll find there's reference to the journal within it. If you go on the journal website, you'll see that you can connect with the Crest series and find out what books are published in the series. Nonetheless, the two were editorially independent of one another, and both were editorially independent of Crest. Although for the journal, a part of its concern was to develop this kind of area of cultural economy as a series of strategic probes that would connect with what were at that point in time the main research themes that Crest had proposed. One was called cultural economy, another was called the media, the economy and social change, another was called culture, governance and citizenship, and another was called cultural values and politics. Nonetheless, the move away from the title Cultural Economy and the Social meant that we had to do a certain amount of new definitional work when it came to actually developing a proposal for the journal and the book series to put out for tender. What we did was we actually put it out for competitive tender and invited a number of publishers to bid for it, and Routledge did and got it. And since then the tables have sometimes been turned a little bit. Definitions of cultural economy and how they've informed the journal's thinking at various stages. This was the only description of cultural economy that we had when we entered into the contract with the ESRC. This was the definition of the initial theme, cultural economy, and as you can see, that defines some of the things that the journal is engaged in, but by no means all of them, and in many respects not the kind of, perhaps not the kind of cutting-edge concerns that the journal has, we think, gone on to develop. This was then the overall publishing rationale that we presented, that we formulated in putting the proposal out to tender. And we presented this publishing rationale for the linked books, for the book series and for the journal, under the rubric of the cultural turn. And a similar language, a language of the cultural turn, was used in identifying what we wanted to be the specific remit of the journal. The main point I want to note here really is actually there's, in retrospect, there's fairly clearly a degree of tension within those formulations between the kind of the cultural turn, a part of representational concerns, representational theory, and the anti-representational orientation of the ontological turn, to use that those two terms as a very brief summary of significantly different points of theoretical orientation. And with regard to the development of JCE, we haven't sought to develop it in a way that it either is committed to the cultural turn or seeks to turn its back on it, but that it has negotiated, and these are things that I think that Liz might speak to, it's sought to negotiate the kind of relationships between these different theoretical orientations and tendencies. You can get some sense of how we saw the journal in the proposal that we developed, in terms of the other journals that we identified as ones that had similar concerns and that we might be in competition with. The double asterisks there indicate the journals, with some question marks in our mind about the Journal of Cultural Economics, the journals that we found out yesterday in a report from the publisher that have cited us 3 times or more over the last 3 years. So you can actually see that in many ways this didn't accurately identify the range of journals that we've actually kind of connected with. There were about another 12 journals, none of these listed, that do cite us quite frequently. Just a couple of more things from me before I finish. We were asked in the proposal to identify a range of papers that we thought would be relevant to the concerns of the journal. This is a pretty good indication of the kinds of literatures that we wanted to engage with, and I think for those of you who know the journal and go on to continuation of that. You can see why we would have cited those kinds of people. You can see ways in which we have engaged with their work. But equally, I think you can see that there are many other schools of thought that we hadn't anticipated engaging with that the journal has gone on to engage. There's no mention of performativity theory. There are significant engagements with anthropological literatures that we'd not fully anticipated. And similarly, we were asked to identify a number of dream topics. So these were the dream topics that were identified in our original proposal. Again, a number of those are things that we've engaged with, but you can see from the list of special issue journals that Joe put up that they by no means encompass the full range of literatures, orientations and topics that the journal has engaged in. This is in part because of the forms of interest that were developed through the special issue proposals that we received. It was in part because of significant reorientations of intellectual direction and concern that were brought about by the GFC. The journal started publication in 2008, that's right, isn't it? So much of our preliminary work was going in 2005, 2006. But I'm going to stop there and ask Liz to pick up with how we moved it on.
Okay, thanks, Tony. I don't know why, but I keep wanting to see this one paraphrase Harvey Mollich for one remark that more than anything else sticks in my head as something that kind of sums up the sort of, what would you call it, the bugbear, the annoying thing, the motivation behind cultural economy type research, and that is there are no independent variables in this henhouse. You can't look at culture as a separate realm that is independent and clearly bounded off from economy. You can't look at the material, the technical, the institutional, the organisational, the political. And the job of the journal has to be to try and kind of boost research that was interested in the connections between these things in all sorts of different ways. I'm going to repeat some of the things that Tony has said to talk about the way in which we probably got clearer about that expansion from the very first initial planning and the first sort of published statements that we made in the journal. I want to quote from the introduction to the first ever issue, and it says, "It is now increasingly clear that economists are just one of a multitude of agents involved in preparing and repairing markets, as well as being generally active in many areas associated with economic life: organisations, markets, economies. These three are not preformed objects. They are given shape and meaning by a host of socio-cultural technical practices that aid what has been called performation by Callum, or the performative action of economics. Recent empirical and theoretical work in this vein, together with a longer heritage of anthropological and historical work, targeted at uncovering the conditions of emergence of distinct areas of economic life, have progressively called the notion of a settled divide between culture and economy into question. This questioning has led the way towards new theoretical and methodological terrain for research into economic and organisational life." And that's what the Journal of Cultural Economy staked out as its terrain. In doing so, the aim was to avoid two mistakes. One of the ones that really kind of preoccupied us at the start was that we wanted not to be confused with a journal of the cultural economy, a journal that was interested in a specific, possibly new, emergent realm, cultural, creative industries. Not that we were antithetical to publishing work in that area or to hosting work in that area. In fact, some of the special issues that we've had, one of them recently this year, Precarity in Creative Labour, does precisely that. But that wasn't to be our entire bag. And the second thing was, as Tony touched upon, we wanted to kind of avoid the sense that what we were going to do was take a broadly cultural turn involved, a cultural turn motivated, culturalist approach to the economy, which starts all research, all investigation from the basic position that saying it's socially and culturally constructed. As Stanley Fish pointed out a long time ago, nothing proceeds from that observation. It doesn't help you do the empirical research. You still have to do empirical research within reference to the objects, practices and institutions that surround the material and infrastructures that surround, and according to the disciplinary principles. So it really kind of takes you nowhere. I think, as Tony also has mentioned, that as time has gone by, we've become clearer and clearer that constructivist mode, narrowly scored, is not what the journal is about. So we had some core epistemological questions, epistemological guidelines even, not a code as in the Pirates of the Caribbean. The editors didn't really stick to a common code, but we shared a set of guidelines, which meant we had some flexibility as we tried to work out what the journal really would be, and as we tried to kind of reach an audience who would tell us what the journal really would be. We definitely wanted to avoid this imposition of an analytical distinction between economy and culture, and prior to examining anthropologically its practical institution, and we wanted to throw out any unhelpful distinctions between the spheres of economy and culture. That we hoped would enable us to analyse economic and organisational life through a focus on the heterogeneous and different ways in which objects and persons, firms, markets and consumers are made up or assembled by the discourses and dispositif of which they are supposedly the cause. We had an interest in what sometimes in some traditions called the constitutive character of knowledge, or the performative character of knowledge and practice. We were interested in the way, early on especially, that financial economics does not just analyse markets, but alters them, intervenes in them. So market indices form part of the materially heterogeneous, socio-technical, economically relevant relations that perform markets and produce market effects and affect people ultimately. So we had this kind of shared focus. And I would say that probably, for me anyway, maybe differently from Tony, in the early days I was a bit worried about this concern, culture, economy and the social. For me it sounded a little bit like we were endangering being cultural economy in the kitchen sink. And I thought we needed to be narrower, and we needed to have a more sort of specific focus on trying to encourage conversation amongst people with those kind of narrowly defined theoretically concerns. But even by the end of the first year I realised I had been wrong about that. So that when we published our collection, which reflected back on the first Crest Cultural Economy conference, I wrote the thing that's in the programme, the cultural economy doesn't have a single doxa. The best thing you can do in terms of summing up what it does is, A, it probably signals work that's got some kind of empirical concern, but it signals work that is interested in this nexus, this connection between the way different forms of activity and objects relate to each other. What became clear to me as we started getting special issue submissions is that some of that was changing far more rapidly and being seen and taken up in ways that I hadn't anticipated. Some of them are big surprises, and some of these were actually to do, some of it was an epistemological turn where we expected an ontological or material politics to inform the journal, but it was probably turned out much bigger and more significant than we initially expected. But another thing was the use of this a sort of flexed up ontological politics, material politics, to look at a greater range of objects. One of the special issue submissions that came to us, I can't remember exactly when, 2009, 2010, was to do with the value of transnational medical research. And this was an example of a special issue collection that seemed to be pushing the boundaries far further than we thought it would go. Not long after that, there was a Data Wars special issue submission. Joe mentioned some of the other ones that we've had, but each of those, they sort of signalled an expansion of the terrain, which has become increasingly important, because it becomes obvious that you cannot take some of the big questions that I've heard discussed today about really big changes. We talk about the quantified self, the Internet of Things, the increasing use of backstage lobbying to change really, oopsie-daisy, big things, healthcare systems, the Affordable Care Act, without looking simultaneously at culture, social, economic and technical concerns. What that amounts to is a long way of saying I think our remit has expanded and expanded in an interesting way into terrain that we would never have expected. Joe has produced a Wordle, a couple of Wordles, one reflecting back on the 2008 contents, which you can see there. But I think actually, these are the most popular words from the 2008 contents, the first 3 issues. And you see, there's a lot of, I think you call them noisy, unclean data in there. But you can also see quite strongly the sort of things that you might expect: distinction, Bourdieu, social, cultural, economic, class.
Just what you watch.
Yeah, markets, brands, advertising. And now if you bring up 2014, I think you can see insurance. That's not me. I wasn't. I did try to pitch the notion that insurance and society are basically the same thing earlier this year. I'm not sure how successful I was. But that has actually got nothing to do with me. It's got to do with the special issue on the economisation of uncertainty, which had a lot of people who had rightly recognised the importance of insurance in the social world. So, yeah, class has kind of slipped away. With the expansion of our terrain into things like the value of medical research, values and valuation, these were terms that were nowhere in 2007, 2008, and now we've had possibly 2 special issues in that specific area, and might have more. Agencing was probably not anywhere in 2005, but agencing and agencement, or agencing and agencement, as the French contradictorily call it, was nowhere. It's not on the Wordle either, but it's another concept that we've wrestled with a bit. But the main thing is, one of the most striking things for me is that these theoretical debates keep getting applied to a broader range of objects than we'd initially imagined. You're getting a massive expansion from a narrow focus on economically relevant phenomena into things that we hadn't really considered, like healthcare systems, healthcare and insurance systems as a economically relevant phenomena, but in a narrowly scored way we hadn't looked at. And I think Bill is going to enlarge a bit more on some of these other new areas.
Sure. Excellent. Thank you. Isn't the ghost of Christmas is yet to come? Isn't he death, like pointing at the tombstone? but just forget that for now. And I just wanted to pick up some things that both Tony and Liz have said, and then gesture towards some things maybe in the future. It's of course very difficult to futurecast, and it's one of those kind of practices that many of us in the room spend a lot of time thinking very critically about when we see people in management and business do it, but I'm going to do it anyway. What's been in the air, of course, since the journal came out as an object in print for the first time is, of course, the GFC, as Tony mentioned. But I also want to throw out there the other kind of thing that's coincident with the GFC, which is, not to be too facetious about it, but the iPhone, right? And the incredible rapid spread of intense mobile computational power generating kind of wakes of data and, to use the business jargon, disrupting all kinds of things in the economy, all kinds of businesses, all kinds of workplace practices, as well as the university and politics and so on. So, some of what we've seen since the journal was founded, I think, demonstrate really the fortuitousness of this, happenstance naming, that it was the Journal of Cultural Economy instead of Culture, Economy, and Society or whatever. Because the journal was able to really tap into this moment when there's a whole lot of shakeup in the world because of the global financial crisis and the rise of mobile social computational power and other things too about the economy. And this wasn't just happening in our spaces, and I'm just going to say our spaces, by which I mean not the discipline of economics, because it was in that same time that it started to happen within the discipline of economics too. So even in economics, you had this kind of shake-up post-GFC. The heterodox economists were let in a little bit Behavioral economics took off as a field, and you saw kind of, because of that in the university, you saw sort of authorization of other kinds of modified economics or modified economy that I think before wouldn't have captured the same kind of attention and legitimacy from university administrators. I am one now, so I will speak for my brethren and sestrin, but it's mostly brethren, I'm afraid. And also for the publishing industry as well. There was suddenly, at least from the point of view of the university and the publishing industry, a market for thinking about the market and economy in new ways. So, I mean, I was making a little list earlier, but I won't sort of go through the whole thing. There was sort of behavioral economics and heterodox economics, the Human Economy Project, started up by Keith Hart in South Africa, the Diverse and Plural Economies framework of Gibson Graham, about which we had mentioned earlier this morning. But you know, there were some of us who were there saying that and quoting them, and nobody really paid attention until you had your GFC, and then it's like, oh wow, actually there are a lot of other experiments taking place, and we really need to see what's going on in the world and grasp in deep empirical terms the kind of richness of the plural economies all around. And the other thing too is that these sort of alternative economics or alternative economies were of course not just things that were happening within academia in new interdisciplinary ventures. At the same time that you had, you know, a proliferation of new journals. In anthropology, there's now a Journal of Business Anthropology. There's valuation studies. The social studies of finance kind of thing has grown and spread and kind of occupied a number of journals. At the same time that's been taking place, there have also been new things happening in the world, new social movements, new organizational forms, inspired in this post-GFC ferment, and in some cases, you know, many of our students and colleagues, right, also involved in all of this. And I would include in there, you know, both sort of the kind of femtech net movements and the techno-libertarians, both Occupy and in the States the Tea Party, all of which are grappling with the kind of fundamental shakeup to a post-war socio-economic, cultural, economic order, and trying to think about what we do with now the kind of, you know, wreckage of all of our various sort of failed utopias, including the neoliberal one, right? The neoliberal one revealed to, as we heard this morning, really just be kind of another monopoly capital and not actually the pure market that we were all promised by the economists. You know, that's also led to some interesting new collaborations too that are generating new kinds of constituencies. So just to tell a little story from my life as a dean of social sciences, I've only been dean for 1 year, and I've now fielded 2 requests from hedge fund managers who want to create or, you know, fund institutes or projects that will introduce economic students to other ways of thinking about the economy, and who are like reading the kind of stuff that we do, right? So there's one who is very proud to tell me that he has employed sociologists and philosophers on his team, right? So, you know, insofar as I'm in this role of future casting right now, there are folks like that who are doing their own future casting and are wanting to populate their team at least a little bit with the kind of thinking that we do. So what is that? We can put that in a little box and discuss that later. What kind of co-optation is it? What kind of limits of critique does it point up? Nevertheless, I think it does point to a kind of thing in the world that's been going on alongside this journal that I think bodes well for the journal. The other thing that's been happening, of course, is all of this is set, and in part, you know, some of these sort of changes have determined, I don't want to say too strong determined, but have determined changes in the structure of the university as an industry and as an institution, and changes in scholarly communication, really drastic, fundamental changes that are changing the way that we do our work, the way that our students do their work, the way that we're able to produce, disseminate, and access knowledge, the kind of, you know, the shift to search as the dominant modality for engagement with any kind of stuff out there in the world, you know, not like reflection or study, but search, right? And I think that all of that, the changes to the university and changes to knowledge production, academic communication, and publishing, point up that the thing that's next for us, and and Joe will be kind of the standard bearer for this for the JCE, is really trying to take that on and think about what new forms of scholarly production activity, whether, right now we talk about scholarly production and we think it means a paper or something, right? But what other kinds of scholarly activity need to be captured by the collectivity of folks who are connected with JCE-like projects, but also everybody else, and can we use the sorts of tools we're developing, loosely, collaboratively together to think through how we're going to do that in the future. So I think I'll just then turn it back to Joe there, who's going to say a few words about that kind of thing.
Well, no,
and then open it up.
Yeah, I pretty much covered it in the section I had previously, but I guess what at this point we would like to do is just so we think of some questions for our three speakers. But I just going to repeat what I said earlier on. We are very much welcoming contributions for you guys, and yeah, and keep your eyes and your electronic eyes peeled for some further, whatever those are, for some further developments and more dynamically into the online production.
Yes.
Of information as well.
I mean, it's worth saying that JCE was always imagined that it would outlive CRESC, but if that's to happen, we need you to feed us. We need you to be citing the journal's content and submitting your stuff and coming to us with special issues and engaging with the content generally.
And themes too, sort of clusters. If you're sort of imagining a thing but can't quite kind of picture a whole special issue, we're very much welcoming theme sections, clusters of
3 or 4 papers.
Yeah.
They are very, very good dynamic content for us, and they produce a lot of traffic to the journal. With a very exciting review and commentary section and dynamic content and innovative content, something that you think is not, conventionally, would you really put, is this a blog thing or is this a journal thing? We are very open to, if you look at the RC section, we've done a number of different things with it over the last few years. And we're very open to putting different sorts of materials there, not just straightforward review articles and essays.
Yeah, we've got a couple of commentaries, for instance, coming forward, which are kind of, for instance, might be reflections on the field, how it's developed over the past years. We might well put something related to this little gathering together in the reviews and commentary section in due course. We'll see, but yeah, that's I think that section connects. Yeah. So does anybody have any questions for any of our speakers about the journal, about where it's come from, where it's going, about the content we host, about any queries or concerns you might have?